So typically when I'm talking about bread, I'm talking sourdough. Today's not about sourdough. It's a regular bread that's easy to make and is ready within the day to have for supper. Stay tuned. Well, good afternoon, everybody. So today has been a bit of a weird day. I don't have to cook supper because I have enough leftovers from last night. Made some chicken stew and dumplings, which I haven't made in a long time. Did it a lot when the kids were little, and my daughter's birthday's today, but we had a birthday supper last night, and that's what she requested. So I have enough leftovers for tonight. Okay, so today's bread is called a stand mixer peasant bread. So I'm using my stand mixer. If you don't have a stand mixer, you can still do it in a bowl. What I'm starting off with today is I forgot I had put the yeast in this water. So anyway, I've got 1 3/4 cups of water, a tablespoon-ish of sugar, and almost a tablespoon, just a scant tablespoon of yeast. So I use the instant quick rise or whatever it's called. So I'm putting that in my bowl. So this recipe calls for 4.5 cups of white flour, or all-purpose or bread flour, whatever it is. I like it when it gives a weight for the flour, especially because your flour can really compact in your bin or whatever it is you keep it in. And even when I stir it and I fluff it up and scoop it in and all the things they say to do, I still find I often get way too much flour than what works well for the dough. So I'm only putting 4 cups in. So that's 4 cups of white flour. And I'm doing a 1/4 cup of whole wheat. I'm not sure that isn't where the peasant part of the bread comes in. And the reason I'm okay with changing the amount is because when you're putting the dough together and it's mixing in the mixer, you can kind of gauge then whether it needs more water or more flour. It does take a little bit of experience because not all dough is the same, but I will show you what I judge by. And I'm also adding a teaspoon of ground salt. So on my stand mixer, I'm using my dough hook. I would not be a bread baker without this mixer, to be honest, especially with my shoulder injury. I don't know that I could do it to the extent that I do without this stand mixer. Now it says to start it on speed 2, so that's what I'm going to do, and I will try and turn down the volume. So I'm just letting this mix, and once the dough all comes together, I'm going to let it mix or knead for 10 minutes. Okay guys, so now what I'm doing, making a mess. I'm going to take my dough out. So I have a nice soft dough, and I'm going to put it in this ceramic bowl is what I'm using. And I've pre-warmed the bowl just because it is already 2:30 and I can still have this bread for supper. So this is one of the reasons I like it. Plus, some of my kids don't like sourdough, and they love this, so it's a treat. So I'm going to oil my bowl. I just use a mister with oil in it. I'm going to put this in the bowl. And I'm just going to put it in and kind of move it around so that it's all coated with oil. Flip it over. So I put it in this way, move it around, get the oil off the bottom, flip it over, make sure the edges are oiled. And then you just cover it with plastic wrap, a damp towel, whatever you have. I use these, I got them on Amazon, I'll link them below. They're like a thin type shower cap type thing. And that's what I use actually for all my leftovers, things like that don't have a lid for the bowl. And so this is going to now sit for about an hour. And you will be amazed how much this rises in an hour. We'll be back, I'll show you. When I make bread, that I like the recipe, but the flour especially is not given in weight, but in cups. I always put less than it calls for. I find that it's hard to get the proper weight when you're scooping with a measuring cup. And I have experimented, and I've been, known what a typical cup of flour should weigh. And no matter how I do it, I always end up with more weight. And so you will see in this recipe, I put 4 cups of white flour and a 1/4 cup of brown, like whole wheat. The recipe called for 4.5 cups of all-purpose or bread flour, white flour. If I had put that in, it would not have worked. I would have had to add more water. I judge by the dough. So I put in less, I mix the dough, and I can tell when it's in the mixer. If it's too dry, too wet, then I can add incremental portions of either water or flour while that dough's mixing. My gauge is just when it starts to keep the edge of the bowl clean. All the dough is in a ball. There's none sticking to the edge of my bowl, but it's not straining my machine. It's not sounding dry, feeling hard. And you really do have to learn what the texture of that recipe should feel like. As I've mentioned in other videos, sourdough is a whole different ball game if you're just using the typical traditional sourdough methods. That's why I really like my dry sourdough starter and the recipe I use with that, because it is not really thin and sticky and wet. And it's consistent. I haven't had a bad loaf since I started using it. Some were better than others, but not one have I had to chop up and make breadcrumbs or croutons, where my bad loaves typically go. And using traditional sourdough recipes and starters and having to feed them all the time and discard and all those things, I did not have consistent results. Now, other people, obviously it's different, because there are lots of people that make lots of loaves of sourdough using just the traditional method, and it works for them. But that's not been my experience. So this has been such a blessing, such a wonderful, game-changing experience in my sourdough, because I honestly don't think I would make sourdough if I had not found this. But today we're not making sourdough, we're just making traditional yeast-raised dough. It is a quicker rise than you might get with typical sandwich bread recipes. But this is more of a Dutch, it'll be baked in a Dutch oven, more of a crusty loaf. My kids love it. I love it, but I'm not. I will usually take just the end crust really thin because I love the crust, but I don't want all that bread. So anyway, I will be back when it comes ready. I have it raising in the mixing bowl right now for approximately an hour. Okay guys, so this is what it looks like in about an hour. So you can see it's come right over the top of this bowl. So now I have pre-warmed this cast iron pot, and I am going to shape that loaf and put it in. So I'm just going to gently take this dough out, and I'm trying not to deflate it any more than I have to. So I'm just going around the edges and loosening it. And just letting it fall out onto the counter. Now I'm going to spray my pot that I'm going to put it in, and it's going to rise in there for another 45 minutes while I heat up the oven. Now this pan has been pre-warmed because I had the oven on earlier. It was still warm in there, so I just put that pot in there to warm. I just want to tighten it up into a ball a little bit. And I'm just going to set this in the pot. I'm going to cover it again with the plastic and turn the oven on to 450 degrees. I'm going to leave this for 45 minutes, and when I come down, then we'll bake it. So this is what it looked like after 45 minutes. I never did get a picture of it when it was done baking, and it was gone within half an hour.